Trying to avoid a 1-3 start. Brissett, far side, caught.
Being an NFL star isn't just about the money. It isn't just about the glory. A lot of times, it's about leaving behind a legacy. Being so iconic and playing so well that you become a hero for the team and city that you played for. While the NFL rosters are rife with turnover, there are certain players that really seem to resonate with certain fan bases and the cities, in some cases even long after they leave town. What's particularly interesting is that it isn't always even the very best player that catches this distinction, but usually an individual whose playstyle, commitment, and clutch time performances were unique and meaningful to the fans. Or maybe they played for that one organization for so long that the city couldn't help but fall in love with them. That being said, today we take a look at every NFL team's most iconic player of all time.
He can reverse it. Manning's going to run for a touchdown because the Bills never saw a total breakdown by the Bills.
Arizona Cardinals, Larry Fitzgerald. When you think of the Arizona Cardinals, you think of Larry Fitzgerald. They took him third overall in the 2004 draft, and he rattled off 11 Pro Bowls over the next 15 plus years, and nearly led the team to a Super Bowl. Not to mention the fact that Fitzgerald was a huge influence and a contributor to the community, and continues to be to this day. Atlanta Falcons, Mike Vick. Man, what could have been. Despite the fact that his time in Atlanta was cut short by the infamous Bad News Kennel scandal, the dual-threat quarterback reinvigorated football in the ATL. And between what he did on the field and his cultural significance off of it, he is clearly the most iconic Falcons player of all time. Baltimore Ravens, Ray Lewis. Though the Ravens are a relatively young franchise, it feels like they've had quite a few iconic players over the years, but none more so than Ray Lewis. Not only was he one of the single best defensive players of his generation, he was also the unquestioned leader of the team, whose pump-up speeches have been plastered all over sports media, and it even led them to Super Bowl glory. So, case closed. Buffalo Bills, Jim Kelly. Sure, the outcome wasn't what he or the city of Buffalo wanted, but Jim Kelly led the Bills, and otherwise a largely middling franchise, to 4 straight Super Bowls. This alone probably would have been enough to make him an icon in Western New York, but when coupled with his charming personality and his devotion to the city, he has clearly ascended to new heights in the iconic hierarchy. Carolina Panthers, Cam Newton. Cam Newton is the Carolina Panthers. Regardless of how his tenure there ended, Superman won a league MVP there, led them to a 15-1 season, plus an admittedly ill-faring Super Bowl appearance. And during his time in Charlotte, he was no doubt the main attraction. Truthfully, the only other player that even has a case is Steve Smith. But Cam's resume is just far too compelling. Chicago Bears, Mike Ditka. When you think about the Bears, there is one face that should come to mind, and that is the legendary Hall of Fame coach and player, Mike Ditka. Ditka made it to 5 Pro Bowls in 6 years with Chicago, and basically reinvented the tight end position, and returned to the Windy City as the head coach for over a decade. The snarl and mustache are exactly what comes to mind when I think of the Bears. Cincinnati Bengals, Chad Ochocinco. Chad Ochocinco, formerly known as Chad Johnson, did the unthinkable during his time in Cincinnati and made the Bengals relevant. He was a stud on the field, and his antics off of it and around it with all the celebrations put a new spotlight on the city and organization. Cleveland Browns, Jim Brown. For all the negativity that seems to hover around the Browns these days, there was a time that they were the class of the NFL, and Jim Brown was the driving force behind that. The 3-time MVP led them to an NFL championship in '64. And quite frankly, he was one of the most dominant players that the league had ever seen. Dallas Cowboys, Michael Irvin. The Dallas Cowboys have had a lot of great players over the years, but I would wager that none of them embody the Cowboys' ethos more than Michael Irvin. The superstar wide receiver was boisterous, a force to be reckoned with, and, well, a playmaker. He is synonymous with what it means to be a Dallas Cowboy. Denver Broncos, John Elway. Though his time as an exec in the Mile High City has officially come to an end, there is no more iconic face associated with the Broncos franchise than John Elway. Denver took him first overall in the '83 draft, and he spent 15 good years racking up accolades and topped it off with back-to-back Super Bowls to end his career. Then he came back and won one for the city as general manager. Yeah, I'd say it doesn't get much better than that. Detroit Lions, Barry Sanders. It's kind of fitting that the Lions' most iconic player, Barry Sanders, retired young, largely due to his frustrations with the way the organization was being ran. I only say this because, man, is that depressing, and really, it just sort of sums up the Lions' existence. In all seriousness, though, Sanders was an absolute stud. The elusive running back was one of the most exciting players the game had ever seen. And really, aside from Calvin Johnson, the only reason to ever turn on a Lions game. It's just a shame that Detroit's incompetence drove him away from football and into an early retirement. Green Bay Packers, Brett Favre. While the public opinion of number 4 has shifted pretty drastically since his heyday, and, rightfully so, considering all the allegations now levied against him, well, it's tough to deny that Favre is the Packers' most iconic player, even amongst all the legends that have played for that organization. The playful antics, coupled with the gunslinger mentality, Favre made football so much fun. And in doing so, he won Green Bay a lot of games. Houston Texans, J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt is far and away in a class of his own when it comes to the history of the Houston Texans. During his prime, Watt was the undisputed best defensive player in the league, so much so that the defensive end even found himself wandering into the MVP discussion a couple of times, a rare feat for a defensive player. When you look at all that Watt has accomplished on the field, his widespread influence on social media, and the impact he made on the city of Houston, particularly after Hurricane Harvey, this one is an open and shut case. Indianapolis Colts, Peyton Manning. Indy has had a lot of legendary players over the years, but number 18 is still what comes to mind when I think of Indianapolis Colts football. Peyton came into the league with a spotlight on him, and he brought that with him to the Midwest, where, after some mild growing pains, he delivered time and time again. Truthfully, I don't know if I've seen a fan base more emotionally split when the Colts released him following his neck surgery. Both he and the city itself seemed gutted. Manning truly is inextricable from Colts football. Jacksonville Jaguars, Fred Taylor. It's kind of fitting that Fred Taylor, one of the league's most underappreciated stars, played the bulk of his career with the Jacksonville Jaguars, an organization that seems to fly under the national radar. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, that might be why he was so underappreciated. But nevertheless, Taylor breathed life into that new franchise with his dynamic ability to make plays and to do so with elegance and class. Jags fans loved him, and they still do to this very day. Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes. There may be a slight degree of recency bias here, but I think it's because it's happening in real time that we tend to undersell the magnitude of what Patrick Mahomes has done since he came into the league. With him under center, the Chiefs have become an absolute juggernaut, and it almost feels like there was never a time that it wasn't like this in Kansas City. That is just how all-encompassing his effect on the team and city have been. Las Vegas Raiders, Tim Brown. The speedy wide receiver owns the franchise record in yards, besting fellow Hall of Famer Fred Bolitkinov by nearly 6,000 yards. He didn't have quite the superstar skill set of a Jerry Rice or Randy Moss, but his longevity gave him plenty of time to secure his place in the history books and the hearts of Raiders fans. Los Angeles Chargers, Phillip Rivers. Although Dan Fouts may have the hearts of older Chargers fans, and LaDainian Tomlinson was probably a better player overall, Phillip Rivers embodies the Chargers organization in a way that is truly unique. Save that last lonely stint in Indy, he played his entire career with the Chargers and competed his tail off for that organization. And the fans still love him for it, even if he was never able to get them to a Super Bowl. Los Angeles Rams, Norm Van Brocklin. Pre-Super Bowl, Van Brocklin was an NFL champion and league MVP. He also set and holds the single-game passing record, despite playing at a time in which the passing game played but a fraction of the role it does today. His NFL record 554 passing yards in a game, which is referenced every time a modern QB has a stellar outing, seems to grow more and more legendary with each passing year. Miami Dolphins, Dan Marino. Though Super Bowl glory always eluded him, Dan Marino does deserve some shine for being the most iconic Dolphins player. And when most fans picture the teal and orange, they see his now retired number 13 across the jersey. Minnesota Vikings, Randy Moss. Few players drew the attention of the media in the way that Randy Moss did, particularly early in his career. He came into Minnesota with an attitude and delivered in an indescribably impressive way on the field, making him an icon in the city and around the league. New England Patriots, Tom Brady. Well, duh. 6 rings, 3 MVPs, and realistically, he could have had more. Tom Brady is inextricable from the New England Patriots and easily their most iconic player. New Orleans Saints, Drew Brees. While I'm sure Brees is grateful for the opportunity he got in New Orleans when his career was essentially hanging in the balance, the city itself seems to have the same level of love for him. In fact, it might even exceed it, especially for what he did post-Hurricane Katrina. New York Giants, Lawrence Taylor. For reasons good and bad, Lawrence Taylor is easily one of the most recognizable names across football, not just the Giants organization. The rough and tumble pass rusher has towed the line of fame and infamy for decades now, and still his highlights play almost every Sunday, sort of like the Mike Tyson of the NFL. New York Jets, Joe Namath. Broadway Joe Namath is really known for one shining moment, and that, of course, was his guarantee and delivery in the 1969 Super Bowl against the heavily favored Baltimore Colts. And for my money, if you can get the Jets to a Super Bowl, well, that's case closed right there. Philadelphia Eagles, Steve Van Buren. We are going way back with this one to the legendary Steve Van Buren, whose punishing and elusive running style helped the pre-Super Bowl era Eagles win 2 championships, and made him one of the most successful and popular players of his time. He was the first player to rush for 10 touchdowns in a season, made 7 All-Pros, and led the league in rushing yards and touchdowns 4 times. Van Buren was and is undeniable. Pittsburgh Steelers, Terry Bradshaw. Once upon a time, long before he became the cartoonish analyst that we all know and love today, Terry Bradshaw was a spry young man and an epic quarterback and leader of men for the Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty of the 1970s. Between his play and leadership, he became the face of the franchise, and has been well respected in and around the league for decades now. San Francisco 49ers, Joe Montana. Joe Cool was a legend, plain and simple. He was widely considered to be the greatest to ever do it for decades. And it was so impressive that folks are still willing to stack him up against the mind-boggling resume of Tom Brady. Between the stray fans he collected having played college ball at Notre Dame and the rabid Bay Area fans, Joe Montana was the face of football for over a decade. Seattle Seahawks, Marshawn Lynch. Beast mode. What more needs to be said about this guy? He was a walking soundbite, 8 Skittles on the sideline, part of the best team in franchise history, and was a hell of a running back. Yes, there was the Legion of Boom and Russell Wilson, but Marshawn Lynch was the heart and soul of those nasty Seattle teams, and he seemed to resonate with the fan base in an exceptional way. In Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Mike Alstott. The Bucs, believe it or not, have had quite a few big-name players wear the pewter and red, but for my money, none were more iconic than this bruiser. Think about it. Alstott was a fullback, and he essentially turned himself into a household name with his determined running style and, well, of course, his production. Now, this is a bit of a unique case because his counting numbers weren't anything overwhelming, on account of him playing fullback. But what he did at the position was so different. And he did it right at the onset of fantasy football and Madden. So as a result, his powerful short yardage running game made waves through the football communities everywhere. Tennessee Titans, Steve McNair. Although Steve and his Titans teams never made it over the Super Bowl hump, they were regularly in contention. And the 2003 AP MVP really helped put the young Titans organization on the map. Air McNair was one of the most exciting quarterbacks of his generation, and an integral part in the transformation we've seen take place at the position over the past 2 decades. Washington Commanders, Sean Taylor. With the way that people in the DMV area talk about Sean Taylor, you would think that he was surveilling Washington's defensive backfield and laying out wide receivers with his explosive, bordering on patented tackling style for decades. But tragically, his pro career lasted just 4 seasons, as he was assaulted and killed by home invaders during the 2007 season at the age of just 24. But let me tell you, the fans truly love this guy though, even to this day. And between the unbelievable playmaking, the competitive spirit, and of course, the soccer cleats, number 21 is indisputably Washington's most iconic player. So, what do you think? Did we get every team's most iconic player right? Let us know what you think in the comment sections below. If you liked this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But, as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.